Hello everybody, welcome back to Quick Tips. I want to talk today about a question I get all the time, and that's about adding shadows in Photoshop. So I work with a lot of students who study architecture, and they're always compositing people into photos. And so what I'm going to do today is go over that. Now, we've talked about compositing in the past, so I'm going to kind of gloss over some of the compositing techniques that we've talked about previously and some of the masking techniques we've talked about previously. If you want to check those videos out, go back and check those videos out. So if I go through any of those things quickly and you want to learn more, please check out those older videos. So we can focus today on those shadows. So first thing we're going to do right now is we have our man here, and we want to put that man into the street scene. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off by going to select subject. I'm going to mask him out. I'm going to drag that layer over onto my background. He's going to be giant. That's okay. That's fine. And I'm actually not going to scale him perfectly right yet. I'm going to just Control T or Command T if you're on a Mac to scale. And I'm going to get him kind of large in the photo, because the first thing I want to do is try to get his coloration right. Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. Again, I'm going to go over this kind of quickly. Check out those compositing videos if you want more tutorials on that, but let's quickly get him blended into the photo a little bit more before we start the shadow work. All right, so now he's roughly blended in. This isn't perfect, but good enough for sake of demo. And what we want to do is, let's say the client wants him crossing the street. So I'm going to go back to my character here. I'm going to do another Control T again, Command T if you're on a Mac. Grab those corners. I'm going to scale him down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of these people in the background to try to size him. Now, to zoom in and out, I'm just using Control plus and minus, Command plus and minus on a Mac to scale him. And I'm just going to make him a similar scale to this woman here, maybe a little bit taller. And then I'm going to zoom back out on this piece and drag him over so he's crossing the crosswalk. Now, when I do that, you can see that he looks still very fake in here. And the reason why is if we look at all of our people over here, they have shadows, and he has no shadow as he's crossing the street. So he kind of looks like he's floating over the street a little bit. There's about 50 different ways that we can do this. I'm going to show you a couple techniques that I use. And the first couple things that I want to do is actually I want to be a good Photoshop user and name my layers. I'm going to leave background like it is, but I'm going to double click this and call this man. And then I want to actually duplicate his layer here. Say OK. Then take that man copy. And I am going to go down here and go to FX. I'm going to go to color overlay, make it black, 100% opacity, so it does a color overlay on him. I'm going to drag that underneath my original man. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this and convert to a smart object. So now this is a smart object and I can modify it a little bit easier. I'm going to zoom back in on him just so I can see things a little bit better, and you can see that black outline kind of coming through there. Well, what I want to do with this now is I want to transform it. Now, you can go to Edit, Free Transform, shortcut Control T or Command T if you're on a Mac, and that will allow us to scale it. Now, in Photoshop, it constrains proportions, and 9 times out of 10, we want to constrain those proportions. But in this case, we actually don't want to, so I'm going to hold down the Shift key. And that will allow us to unconstrain those proportions. And we can see here now we're getting kind of a shadow. I can move this around. I can adjust it to start matching up with the bottom of his feet roughly. And again, this is going to look a little weird and a little fake to start. Now, if you had a really harsh light, this would work really well. If the light was coming and hitting him from the front and it was a really harsh light hitting him, this shadow would work perfectly. But what I always suggest doing is taking a look at the other shadows that are going on here. We can see that they're a little bit softer. They're not so hard. I'm going to hit return to finish this transformation. And then what I want to do is I actually want to soften this. You can see these are soft. This is way too hard. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. I'm going to do it the way that I have always done it and actually go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. This is my personal favorite blur, but you can use the ones you like. And then as I do that, I can choose my settings for my Gaussian Blur and maybe make it harder or softer, again, depending on the light. We can see that, again, these shadows are pretty soft, so it's not going to be like super harsh. We're going to get something kind of like this here and go with it. We can also see that those shadows aren't super dark. Well, let's go ahead and name this. I'm going to name this shadow 1. And then I'm going to turn this opacity down just a hair. So you can see it's starting to match more up with those. But with that, we are losing a little bit of the weight under his foot. And you probably noticed that I named this shadow 1. A lot of times when I'm building shadows, I do it with multiple layers. So I hit the plus. I'm going to do shadow 2. Then I'm going to drag that shadow 2 underneath my man. I'm going to go to a brush tool with a black color selected. It's going to look a little silly for a minute because it's going to be kind of overboard. That's okay. And I'm just going to start to brush in some black underneath him. Now with this, again, I could go just to opacity and change that, and that's not bad. I could go back to my Gaussian blur. Actually, I think for this one, I am going to go with that opacity. It's looking a little bit large and a little bit weird, but that's okay. This is the thing. Just like we talked about in compositing, we're going to blend these, okay? So we're going to go to the eraser tool. Now, depending on what you need for your shadow, you're going to think about the eraser tool, and you're going to think about the size of that brush and the hardness of that brush. So if you need a harder edge, you're going to want to be up here in like 60, 70%, and then come in and do that. Like if you wanted a hard edge on your shadow. Now that's probably a little bit too hard. So I can go in here and decrease that. Again, these shadows in this piece are very soft. If I want it to be really soft, I can turn that hardness all the way down, go up with my size, and this is a trick a lot of people make mistakes with, is they try to use the entire brush. Just use the edge. Just use the edge of your brush as you're fading that in and blending that in. If you use the entire brush, it won't blend in very well. And you can start to adjust the blending between the background and the shadow. And again, you might have to go back to your opacity. You might need to knock that down a little bit. You might need to go to your shadow 1 and knock the opacity down of that. You're going to start to just get that look and feel that works to match up with those shadows over here. Now with that too, if you ever need to adjust those together, you can hold down the shift key, grab both of those shadows, go to your move tool, and you can start to move those around. So again, you can see these are a little bit of an angle. You might need to angle these back as well. Now, if I were doing this for real, I would probably lay down about 3 or 4 different shadow layers to really start to blend that together. This is a good start here, but what I would suggest to you is to start to play around with layering and opacity and blending and using your brushes to really make these things come together. It takes a little bit of time, but with a little bit of work, you can really make these super effective shadows that are believable in Photoshop. Well, that's it for this time. Can't wait to see you back next week for another quick tip.